I hope wherever you are, you're feeling seen, safe, and loved. Today, I want to share with you a story about quiet strength, unspoken affection, and a love that waited behind carefully built walls. Because sometimes the deepest connections begin not with grand gestures, but with a cup of coffee, a silent nod, and the courage to see someone truly for who they are. Ilara Bennett had been working at Hale & Hart Media for 3 years. 3 years without a single late arrival, a single typo, or a single complaint. She was known for her absolute professionalism, classic fashion sense, and uncanny ability to anticipate her boss's needs before he even spoke. But that didn't mean she understood Dominic Hale, the powerful, enigmatic CEO who seemed carved from silence and stone. He was the kind of man who could silence an entire boardroom with a single look. His schedule was timed down to the second, precise as a Swiss watch, and Ilara, the only person with daily access to him, had never once seen him out of control. Until one December morning. It was 8:50 a.m. Ilara hurried past the front desk, clutching the quarterly report documents, silently cursing herself for oversleeping after staying up late working on her novel. But when she reached the 55th floor, Dominic's private office, she stopped cold. Through the frosted glass, she saw him, Dominic Hale, standing still in front of the massive window. His shoulders were slightly hunched, one hand braced against the glass as if it was the only thing holding him upright, the other holding a phone pressed to his ear. She couldn't hear what was being said, but the weariness on his face was unmistakable. Ilara had seen Dominic in high-stakes meetings, at international summits, during intense negotiations. He was always composed, unshakable, but this time he looked human. A part of her wanted to retreat, to give him privacy, but another part, the one that had begun to soften, longed to understand him, to reach him. And Dominic, though he hadn't turned around, somehow sensed her presence. When he spoke in his usual deep, composed voice, Ilara knew he'd known she was there all along. She stepped inside, handed him the file with calm precision. They said little, but when his hand brushed hers as he took the documents, a spark shot up her spine. Something had shifted, just a little, but enough to form the first crack in the walls they'd both spent 3 years carefully building. On what seemed like an ordinary Thursday night, the Asian markets collapsed. Hale & Hart was plunged into financial crisis, and the lights on the 55th floor burned late into the night. Ilara was the last to leave the building, aside from Dominic. She hadn't planned to stay, but when Dominic asked for a full damage summary by 2 a.m., she didn't hesitate. Any exhaustion faded away, because part of her wanted to stay, to be closer to him. For hours, they worked nonstop. Dominic had shed his jacket, rolled up the sleeves of his crisp white shirt, his hair slightly tousled from running his hands through it. He looked different, more human, less CEO, like a man fighting to protect something he cared about deeply. Around 1 a.m., Ilara walked into his private office carrying the latest update. His desk was covered in annotated reports. He looked up, eyes tired and red-rimmed, but when he saw her, his gaze softened. She offered him a fresh cup of coffee, and when their fingers touched, he didn't pull away. They froze for a moment, just a second, but it felt like everything around them had gone quiet. Ilara turned quickly, trying to hide the tremble in her chest, but her hand slipped, knocking the coffee cup off balance. Dark liquid spilled across key financial drafts, soaking them instantly. "I'm so sorry," she gasped, scrambling for tissues, heart pounding. Dominic looked down at the ruined papers, then up at her, and there was no anger in his face. Instead, he let out a quiet sigh. Soft, human. "It's fine," he said, voice low and calm. "It's just paper. We can reprint it." That gentleness unraveled something in her. Ilara blinked back sudden tears. In that silence, something shifted. They were no longer boss and assistant. They were just two people, standing on the edge of something neither could name but both could feel. She looked at him, and he looked at her, deeply, intently, for far longer than necessary. And from that moment on, their connection would never again be just professional. Ilara wasn't just a model assistant. She was also a writer. On long nights after work, she lost herself in the pages of her novels, where the heroine always fell for a powerful man who hid deep wounds beneath his perfect exterior. Maybe that's why she noticed the little things. The details others overlooked, she remembered, like the unfamiliar signature on donation slips, or the folders marked with children's hospitals and scholarships submitted anonymously, but bearing handwriting she'd seen countless times. Dominic Hale. She froze. The donations were massive, meticulous, and deeply personal, as if the sender knew every child receiving support. Handwritten notes described medical conditions, favorite hobbies, even small dreams. No press, no company logo, not a single public statement. This wasn't corporate social responsibility. This was a heart quietly beating for things no one else saw. Elara felt breathless. She had thought of him as a cold strategist, driven by numbers and bottom lines. But behind closed doors, Dominic had a secret world, one where he poured out compassion in silence, as if he feared what would happen if anyone knew. From that moment, she saw him differently, not just as someone she admired, but as a man with depth, unspoken pain, and a soul quietly waiting to be reached. When they crossed paths in the hallway the next morning, Dominic's gaze lingered on her a beat too long. Elara smiled, not as his assistant, but as someone who now understood more than anyone else ever had. He didn't say a word, but the small nod he gave her and the flicker of vulnerability in his eyes spoke volumes. The Valley Hotel gleamed under 1,000 lights during Hale and Hart's annual gala. The grand ballroom had been transformed into a winter wonderland, where New York's financial elite clinked glasses beneath soft chandeliers and the quiet pulse of string music. Elara had no time to enjoy it. She was in the wings, clipboard in hand, coordinating the entrance sequence, checking name tags, adjusting light cues, and directing her staff with quiet precision. This was the biggest event of the year, and she was in charge. As she passed near the bar area to confirm a last-minute seating change, she froze. Behind a frosted glass divider, two familiar voices cut through the low hum of music, sharp and cold. We have enough. The donations, hospitals, foster kids, medical care. It all leads back to Dominic Hale. Clear breach of protocol, abuse of power. Shareholders won't forgive that. Tonight, we strike. Elara's blood ran cold. They were planning to bring Dominic down using the very acts of kindness he'd kept hidden all these years. Without a second thought, she bolted across the ballroom, weaving through private corridors that led to the VIP suites. She burst into Dominic's room, only to find it empty, save for the sound of running water in the bathroom. Before she could decide whether to wait, a knock came at the door. "Dominic, 5 minutes. You're up next." It was Tom, his public relations lead. Panic gripped her. If someone saw her here in Dominic's private room during the gala, the consequences would be irreversible. Desperate to protect him, she rushed toward the walk-in closet and slipped inside, closing the door just as footsteps approached. The door creaked open. Dominic, fresh from the shower, towel wrapped around his waist, stopped dead when he saw her huddled in the shadows, wide-eyed and trembling. "Elara?" His voice was rough, low. I overheard them," she whispered. "They're planning to use the donations against you. I came to warn you, but you weren't here. Then Tom knocked, and I didn't want anyone to misunderstand." He stared at her for a beat, then another. He stepped inside the closet until they were breathing the same air. "You came to protect me," he said softly. "Even afraid, you still came. For me. When everyone else only sees the title, you saw the man." She didn't answer. Her eyes did. When his lips met hers, reason melted away. Their first kiss burned with the fire of everything they'd held back for 3 long years. Elara trembled, not from fear, but from the intensity flooding her chest. His hand wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer, as if he'd been waiting for this moment all his life. That night, they didn't leave the suite. As Dominic's lips traced soft lines down her shoulder, Elara knew tonight marked the end of every line they'd drawn, and the beginning of something neither of them could undo. By morning, the city hadn't yet woken, but the rumors had. Dominic Hale, the ever-present, unshakable CEO, had not taken the stage at the gala. His much-anticipated speech was instead delivered by the vice president, with a vague announcement citing health reasons for Dominic's sudden withdrawal. Ilara knew the truth. She knew exactly why he hadn't shown up. Because of her. Because of the night they had crossed a line neither of them could uncross. And though there had been no promises, a part of her had begun to believe. To hope? That hope shattered by midday. Photos began surfacing, grainy but undeniable, capturing them exiting the hotel elevator together. His gaze on her, far too gentle to deny. The board didn't need further explanation. An emergency meeting was called. Ilara, still acting as executive assistant, was summoned to take notes. But when she stepped into that conference room, every eye turned toward her, not with respect, but judgment. Wells, the same man whose conspiracy she had overheard, led the charge. Personal entanglements with subordinates during sensitive negotiations are a clear violation of company ethics, he said, and they've compromised the entire deal with our Japanese investors. Dominic sat at the head of the table, composed, cold. Ilara Bennett, Wells continued, did she have any involvement in your decision to withdraw from last night's presentation? Dominic looked up. For a moment his eyes found hers, and then looked away. No, he said. She had no involvement. The relationship does not exist. It was a lapse in judgment, a mistake, not worth further discussion. It hit like a slap. Does not exist. Ilara swallowed hard, forcing her fingers to write the words of the man who, only hours ago, had held her like she meant the world. After the meeting, she returned to her desk, typed her resignation letter. No anger, no tears, just emptiness. As the elevator doors opened on the ground floor, she paused for one last look at the glass tower reflecting a dull gray sky. Dominic could keep his empire. She would keep the one thing he'd just broken, her pride, and her quietly aching heart. Ilara didn't look back. No message, no call, no explanation. She vanished from Dominic's world, as if she'd never existed. But to Dominic, she stayed, in every empty space she used to fill. For nights after the board meeting, he couldn't sleep. Sitting alone in his penthouse, gazing down at Manhattan's shimmering skyline, he replayed that moment again and again. Her eyes, the second he said, not worth further discussion. The guilt was suffocating. He'd chosen silence to protect the company, the shareholders, but he'd lost the only person who had ever truly seen him. Without Ilara, the office felt colder. The coffee wasn't right. The files arrived out of order. But what he missed most was her quiet presence, her steady calm, the soft smile she offered when she left a room without saying a single unnecessary word. As for Ilara, she buried herself in her Brooklyn apartment. She wrote by day and wrote deeper by night. The pages of her manuscript piled high, telling the story of a woman who once believed, once loved, and was rejected by the very man she trusted most. She didn't want to forget the pain. It reminded her that love wasn't just about feelings. It was about choice. And he hadn't chosen her. Until one early winter morning, a small package arrived at her door. Inside was a leather-bound journal, every page filled with a familiar hand. A journal written by Dominic. Each day without you, I wrote. I wrote what I did wrong. I wrote what I never got to say. Tucked inside was a small silver key tied with a red ribbon and a single note. A cabin in Vermont, no offices, no shareholders, just me, if you still want to step into my world. Ilara arrived in Vermont on a crisp early spring morning, snow melting off the cabin's roof, the air clear like all the unsaid words between them. The cabin stood nestled among pine trees, simple, warm, not luxurious, but enough to make her pause. Dominic was there waiting, not as the CEO of Hale & Hart, but as a man who had made mistakes and was learning to love someone the right way. He opened the door as she pulled up, his hair tousled by the wind, a notebook in hand, the manuscript he'd begun the day she walked away. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said, his voice stripped of pride, left only with hope. I wasn't sure either, Ilara smiled. But I read your journal, and I saw something I never expected. You reaching into your own heart. Inside the cabin, beside the crackling fire, Dominic told her everything. About the sleepless nights, his childhood in foster care, the first time he ever felt seen, when she walked into his office and quietly placed coffee on his desk. I've always used silence to protect myself, he confessed, but staying silent with you only ensured you'd disappear. Ilara took his hand, placed it gently over her heart. We all have our pasts, she said softly, but I don't want our love to be another escape. I want it to be a beginning. There were no grand declarations, no promises carved in stone. Just two people who had once broken apart, choosing now to gather the pieces and build something real, even if imperfect. In that little cabin among the trees, where sunlight filtered through the windows each morning, they began again. Not with fairy tale illusions, but with truth, with quiet courage, with the kind of love that is practiced, not performed. And in that simplicity, they found what they'd been searching for all along. Not a perfect story, just a true one. They returned to the city, not to resume the past, but to begin something new. Together. Dominic remained CEO of Hale & Hart, but he was no longer the distant man behind boardroom doors. He smiled more, walked hand in hand with Ilara through Central Park on quiet Sundays, and didn't flinch when the media pointed their cameras toward them. Ilara didn't go back to her old desk. She wrote. This time, not fiction. She wrote what had truly happened, the pain, the longing, the undeniable love. Her debut book, titled Behind the Glass Walls, was a confession in ink, a love story unfiltered, unedited, and utterly true. On launch day, the book sold out in 24 hours. Not because Dominic was a famous CEO, but because people found in her words a love that was both fragile and fierce, authentic in every line. At her first book signing event, as Ilara signed the final copy, Dominic stepped onto the stage, holding the book she had written. This story, it's yours, he said, his voice thick with emotion. But it's also mine. And if you'll let me, I want to write the next chapter, with you as my wife. He knelt, opened a ring box. Ilara nodded, tears falling onto the page. 2 months later, they married in a quiet ceremony in Vermont, the place where they'd found each other a second time. Since then, each day together has been a new chapter, unedited, unfiltered, just real. And their love, after everything, is the truest story they've ever told. And that, dear soul, was their story. Raw, imperfect, but real. Ilara and Dominic taught us that love isn't always loud. It's often found in moments of stillness, in brave choices, and second chances. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, or leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, take care of your heart. Keep believing in quiet miracles. This is Noah, signing off from Noah Stories, where every heart finds its home.